Looking now to the next 20 years and our possibilities, I'd like to make just two central observations. First, South Africa is very fortunate to have 6 strategic strengths, or what in modern terms we call killer apps. Firstly, we are a constitutional democracy. Secondly, we have a good, if uneven, infrastructure, certainly for an emerging economy. Thirdly, we have a strong and resilient private sector. Fourthly, we have 1 billion people north of us, many of whom are untouched by the products and services you took for granted before you'd finished breakfast. Fifthly, we are in a good time zone and a good geographical location. And lastly, we are resilient and adaptive. Secondly, on the other hand, we have some very major problems and challenges which you know well. Grinding poverty, structural unemployment, growing inequality, and at present, a very low growth rate. As I have suggested, the South African nation-state is a long way from maturity. It should be clear to all of us that the long march to achieving our full potential will be a multi-generational phenomenon. That is why it's worth looking 20 years or more ahead. At times, it's easy to be impatient, and at other times, it's possible to be too patient. Speed is a central concept in strategy, particularly in today's world. One of the first principles in strategy is that the rate of learning for an institution, or in this case a nation, must be higher than the external rate of change. Certainly our economic performance that we are currently living with is showing us that we are not achieving the right mix in that formula. I want to turn to the central role of the economy. In my view, as blunt as it sounds, economic growth is the oxygen of democracy. Without economic growth, transformation of the economy may rest on the centralization of power by the public and private sector, and even potentially by elements of civil society, such as trade unions. In spite of the claim of each to be representative, South Africa's hierarchical structure is a major handicap to a properly constituted democracy. In terms of economic growth, further transformation requires additional resources, which in turn require a large dose of grand strategy and the effective use of power, which is at the core of all good strategy. The current growth rate is extremely marginal and causes a major disruption to the current shape of the transformation project. The public sector or state may have very few options in a low-growth environment if there's a determination to pursue the transformation agenda. These include, firstly, the option of the state increasing the tax burden, thereby disincentivizing the creative middle classes as well as institutions. Or secondly, it can borrow from our children by rapidly increasing government debt in order to keep transformation budgets alive. The third option for the public sector, which is common, is a view in which you pretend to have a plan when in fact you don't. In that case, you leave all players to the lowest common denominator, where each constituency pursues its own interest and so in so doing damages the commonwealth. The final of these oversimplified options is command from above, in which an authoritarian state imposes rule through oppressive means and in a dramatic way overrules constitutionalism to enforce what it believes is necessary as the correct response to the growing crises. Frequently, this is the pathway from a fragile state to a failed state. When we are reasonably realistic rather than excessively optimistic, I think it's fair to say that the South African environment is marked by a significant level of uncertainty, with tenuous relationships, modest social capital, and is marked by significant contradictions, misalignments, and frictions. The South African state faces the enormous challenge of dealing with the structural consequences of colonization and apartheid, which has left behind 15 million South Africans who are excluded from the modern economy and who are increasingly affected by perceived or real inequalities and are unable to gain formal employment at decent wage levels. South Africa is dominated by a high level of centralization, which includes a big and significant public sector, which is not only interventionist in nature, but also a large proportion of the formal economy. The state touches our lives economically every day. We have a big network of state-owned enterprises, a large civil service with mixed productivity, and at least the perceived danger of significant levels of corruption. The South African economy is suffering from underinvestment, and in recent years has not attracted a significant level of high-quality foreign direct investment, which could have played a constructive role in building the economy's global brand and also generating confidence in the local economy. South African companies are sitting on significant balance sheets, but are not investing in productive capacity due to a real or perceived lack of confidence. This may be a self-inflicted misperception. South Africa's large companies are in fact investing globally, and particularly in Africa, as they seek to change their risk profile and take advantage of growing markets and high returns associated with that investment. As I said earlier, South Africa has been a great beneficiary of normalization from a previously unequal and oppressive dispensation. A combination of extraordinary natural resources, South Africa's location at a time of European colonial expansion, and the imposition of a hierarchical authoritarian white state have left a legacy that will continue to play itself out, in my view, for decades to come. It is a central point of these remarks that economic growth is vital to democracy, and that without a substantive turnaround in the growth rate, the South African political economy is likely to become very difficult to stabilize, to manage, and to transform. Transformation to the left, or maybe the right, is definitely a possible scenario, as the governing party faces very significant pressure within its own constituency and its own leadership to deliver what has been promised and what is right after all these years. The ANC as a political party with a mandate faces three possible scenarios in terms of its policy and leadership choices. Firstly, it can reform itself through disciplined reorganization, in which a generation of effective leaders are able to grasp the broad economic and social challenges firmly. Secondly, it can continue to seek to be inclusive, to muddle, to have a broad agenda, and retain its culture of being a mass movement with strong appeal to the majority of South Africans by appeasing multiple but increasingly divergent stakeholders. Thirdly, it can make an ideological or political choice to the left or the right. To the left, if that's the correct term, it can seek to dampen the attractiveness of new political opposition forces currently emerging, or alternatively move to the right and satisfy its burgeoning middle-class constituency by following conservative policies. All three choices are problematic and very big dilemmas for the leadership.